Hello, my name's Kingsley Singleton and welcome to this Photoshop and Elements video lesson from Digital Photo, the UK's best-selling photography and imaging magazine. In this lesson, we're going to look at a technique that's great for livening up everyday scenes and giving a fine art twist to a variety of subjects. Usually called a joiner or photo collage, it simply involves taking a selection of photos of the same subject, often from slightly different angles, and then combining them to make a single finished image. As you can see, this creates a unique and slightly skewed version of reality, disguising and distorting the subject's shape, a bit like a cubist painting. The separate photos that go to make up the joiner overlap with one another and sit slightly out of register, and this makes for a really intriguing view of the world. An image that you'll want to look at for a lot longer than a straight shot of the same subject. This kind of longevity and the ability to stand the test of time is really important in a fine art image, because that's what separates it from a regular snap. To finish off the technique, we'll add a subtle colour treatment and a little bit of extra contrast. But instead of doing this to each individual photo that makes up the joiner, we'll do it at the end when they're all combined, a much easier route to a great fine art image. Okay, so I'll just minimise the finished version here and I'll get about showing you how it's done. The first thing we need to do is open up the background to our joiner, and you'll find that in the Start Images folder that's on the CD. So to open it up, just come up to File, down to Open, and we'll pick the picture called background.jpg. And this just forms the background to where we're going to lay out our other photos. Now the example image that we're working on is going to be in landscape format, but if you want to produce one in portrait format, just come up to Image, down to Rotate, and pick 90 degrees left or right. That'll swap the canvas around there, as you can see, and you'll be ready to get started. But as I said, I want mine in landscape format, so I'll just press Ctrl and Z on the keyboard to take it back to a horizontal format. The next thing we need to do is start importing our photos. So it's back up to File, down to Open, and once again on the disk you'll find 8 of these tree pictures. We're going to start with tree1.jpg, so highlight that and click Open. That'll appear in a separate window, and then all you need to do to get it into the background is just come up to Select and down to All, or press Ctrl and A on the keyboard. Then come up to Edit and down to Copy, or press Ctrl and C on the keyboard. That'll copy it into the system's memory. Then we can close down this picture, and back on the background.jpg file, we'll come up to Edit again and down to Paste, or press Ctrl and V on the keyboard. That drops the picture in on a separate layer, and at this point we want to be using the Move tool, so give that a click in the toolbox just to highlight it, and then up in the options bar, make sure that you've got Show Bounding Box ticked. That'll bring up a bounding box all the way around the pixels that are on that layer. And now, what I want to do, because obviously the picture is much too big at the moment, is just reduce its size a bit. So I'm just going to click on these corner handles and drag inwards. Now at this point you want to be constraining the proportions of your picture. You don't want it to kind of go all wonky and out of proportion there. So to do that, just make sure that the Constrain Proportions option is ticked up there in the options bar. What we want to do is reduce our picture down to something around about 30%. That should be okay. You will see the numbers up there in the options bar again, so you can keep tabs on how much you're actually shrinking the image. And then once it's down at about 30%, just click within the bounding box there and drag it up sort of somewhere around the top of the frame. Just about there should be okay. And once you're done resizing it, all you need to do is click the tick. Now at this point I want to bring in my layers palette, so to get yours up on screen, just come up to Window and down to Layers. I'll just drag mine in from the side of the screen there. We'll just reduce its size a touch. And straight away in here you'll be able to see that we've got our background layer. That's our sort of grid that our photos are going to be sitting on top of, and then we've got layer 1. That's the photo that we just dragged in. And it's this wonderful, flexible, layered system that's going to allow us to move all our pictures into the same file and kind of drag them around and get them positioned exactly how we want. So let's get the next photo in. Back up to File, down to Open, pick tree2.jpg, click Open again, and once again, to cut and paste it into our working document. Control and A on the keyboard to bring up those marching ants all the way around it. Then Control and C to copy it into the computer's memory. We can close it down then, and back on the background.jpg file, Control and V to paste it in. Again, of course, it's much too large, so we'll click on the corner handle there and drag it in. And for these portrait orientated pictures, I'm just going to reduce them to about 40%. Something around about there should be okay, I think. And once again, we'll just drag that up sort of towards the top of the frame. Don't worry about the positioning too much at this stage. We're more interested in just getting all the different photos in so that we can start working on them. Click the tick to finalize that transformation. Then again, it's back up to the file menu, down to open, and this time we'll import the one called tree3.jpg. Just cutting and pasting it into the document in the exact same way as we did before, and then resizing it. Just taking note of those numbers up there in the options bar, just so it's roughly the same size as the other ones on the page. Okay, so I'm going to go about dragging the other photos in to make up our photo joiner, and you do the same, and I'll see you in a moment. Okay, so here we are with all our different photos added, all 8 of them sitting there above the background. You can see them in the layers palette here on the side of the screen. And just to make things a little bit easier when you're sort of spreading your photos around, a couple of things. Just make sure first that under the View menu and down to Snap To, you've got Guides unticked. Otherwise, you might find that they kind of seem to clip around and sort of jump around where you don't want them. And then up here in the options bar, still on the Move tool there, just make sure that Auto Select Layer is ticked. And that means you don't have to go to the Layers palette to select the layer that you want to move. Before you move it, you can simply click on it on the page, and it'll move around for you. So what we want to do now is just make sure that the central parts of the tree, like layer 3 here and layer 2, are more visible than the areas around the edge. We want them to be more prominent. We want them to sit sort of on top of all of the other pictures. Now this is really easy to do in the Layers palette, and all it involves really is just clicking on the layer thumbnail, holding the mouse button down and then dragging it right to the top. And of course, because the layer is now on top of all the other layers, that means that that's the one that's the most visible. So we'll do it with layer 2 as well. We'll just click and drag that one upwards to just below layer 3 there, I think. And there we go. And that'll really help us out there, because it's these central parts of the tree that we want to be the clearest. The others we're going to kind of blur out a little bit and kind of darken them, just drawing attention to the center of the frame, to the middle of the subject. So that's why we control them in that way within the Layers palette. So I'm also just going to zoom in a little bit closer, and then use the spacebar, just holding that down so I can kind of click and drag my way around the picture. And then just using this auto select function via the Move tool there, just click and kind of drag these some of these outlying parts, just drag them around so that they sit a little bit more in harmony with those branches that are coming out of the central areas. Just click on this one as well. We can line up our horizon a bit. We in truth, we don't want things to line up perfectly, but if they're too out of register, it'll look quite messy. So we want them just to be kind of slightly kind of skew-if. Something about there should be okay. And then we'll just continue to click and drag our way around the image, just kind of making sure that all of these separate layers are kind of lining up as we want them. So we're just clicking on the separate photos there, just waiting for that bounding box to appear so that we know it's selected, and then we can click and drag within the bounding box just to move it around. And as I say, we're not sort of really that interested in things lining up perfectly. We just want to get them kind of roughly into position at this stage. So we'll come back out to a full view, and yeah, I think that's kind of starting to look pretty good. The next thing that we're going to do is just kind of apply a little bit of blur to these outlying areas, just once again sort of further concentrating the viewer's attention on the middle part of the scene. And also a bit of blur tends to go a long way when you're trying to create a bit of an arty image. It kind of reminds us of sort of pinhole cameras and tilt and shift effects and all those kind of nice arty things. So to do this blurring, we'll first just select one of the outlying photos. Just click on it once again to bring that bounding box up. And then instead of going straight up to the filter menu and using the blur, what I'm first going to do is just make a selection of this area so that it retains a nice crisp edge. We only want to be blurring the pixels that are sort of on the photo, not the photo itself, if you know what I mean. We don't want it to look blurry around the edges. We only want the subject in those parts to be blurred. All will become clear, I'm sure, once I actually apply it. So what we're going to do is come over to the layers palette, find the layer that we've selected. That's layer 4. You can see that because it's become highlighted. And then I'm just going to hold down the control key and click on that thumbnail. And as I do that, you see the cursor gets a little rectangular marquee next to the hand there. And once I've clicked it, the marching ants appear all the way around the pixels on that layer. Great little way of shortcutting to a selection of whatever is on that layer. And once we've done it, we can come up to Filter, down to Blur, and pick Gaussian Blur. And in here, I'm just going to click and drag that radius slider up to about I think sort of 9 or 10 pixels, something about that should be okay. And once we've done that, we'll click OK to exit the palette there, and then continue to work around the edge of the image, just blurring those kind of outlying photos. Before we do though, we just need to deselect those marching ants, so press Ctrl and D on the keyboard, or come up to Select and down to Deselect to get rid of them, and then we'll click on the next of our outlying photos there. Just drag that one back into position, and once again back over to the Layers palette, find the one that's highlighted, hold down the Control key on the keyboard, click on the thumbnail, the marching ants will appear, and then we can come up to the Filter menu again, down to Blur, Gaussian Blur. We'll just vary the amount of blur that we're putting in there. This time I'll take it down to about 7 pixels. Click OK to exit the palette. Control and D again to deselect. And then we'll just select this one hiding up here at the top behind some of the others. Layer 1 in the Layers palette. Select all that. Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. Give it a bit more blur, this one. Maybe 9 pixels or so. Click OK and deselect. And then before I continue just going around these outlying images, I'm just going to click and drag layer 1 there up to the top of the palette, because I just want it sort of peeping over the top of the tree. And then we can click and drag it sort of into position. That's looking pretty good. And then we're on to our next photo, that's layer 7. Just selecting it before we add the blur. A little bit less this time, I think. OK. Deselect. Then we're on to layer 5, second to last of the photos we need to blur. Deselect again, and then finally we'll come on to our lowest photo that's making up the joiner here. Select it and blur once more. Control and D for the final time to deselect, and then just like the one at the top, I'm going to click and drag it up so it's at the top of the stack. It appears over the bottom of the tree there. But in this case, because I think that's coming over the bottom of the trunk a little bit too much, just going to kind of leave it selected there, highlighted in the Layers palette. Select the rectangular marquee tool, and then I'm just going to click and drag it out over sort of about half of that photo. Something about there should be okay, just to kind of get rid of the pixels that are covering up the trunk on the layer below. And then once we've made that selection, come up to Edit and down to Cut. That'll get rid of that part, but we've still got the nice blurred piece there right at the bottom of the joiner. But we're not blurring that trunk. So that's really starting to come together now, I think. But I think we can do a little bit more kind of breaking up of the separate photos, just kind of shifting them around a little bit. And we're going to do this by rotating them ever so slightly. We're going to leave the central parts perfectly level, but the ones, once again, around the edges, I'm just going to angle them slightly. So starting with layer 8, which we've still got highlighted in the Layers palette, it's back over to the Move tool, give that a click in the toolbox, and because Show Bounding Box is still ticked, we can just hover our cursor just outside the bounding box that appears around those pixels, click and then just drag ever so slightly just to reposition that photo. Click the tick when you're done, and then we'll just work around those other pictures, just giving them that kind of slight angling, and just giving the viewer the more of a feeling like these pictures have kind of been laid out on a page. So we're just working around those outer photos, much as we did with our blurring. That's pretty good. And then finally this last one at the bottom left, we'll just click and drag that one out too. Just click that tick for the final time, And this just gives us a kind of a slightly more freehand look to our composition, and it works really nicely with that grid that's running behind it. The final thing that I'm going to do to all these separate photos before we get on to adding the colour effect is just control the contrast a little. I just want to make the outlying photos a little bit darker, just to kind of reinforce this idea that they've all been shot separately. And this works in much the same way as our angling and our blurring that we've just done. So with layer 4 here, still selected, we can see that by the bounding box. We're just going to bring up the levels palette on screen, so come up to Enhance, down to Adjust Lighting and pick Levels, or you can press Ctrl and L on the keyboard. That'll bring up the Levels palette, and then I'm simply going to click on the middle slider, the mid-tone slider or the gamma slider, and drag that a little bit over to the right. There you can see that part of the composition darkening a bit. We can take that over to maybe kind of 75 or 71, just giving it a kind of a point of difference to the other photos. Click OK when you're happy with that, and then just as we did before, we'll continue to work around the outlying parts of the image, just giving them kind of subtly different values, clicking OK to exit that palette, all the time just using Ctrl and L on the keyboard to bring up the levels palette. We don't want to mess around going into all these menus all the time if we can help it. So each time I'm just clicking on the separate photo, making sure that bounding box comes up so I know that's the one that's selected, and just altering that contrast. We can't see that one, so we'll just drag the levels palette out of the way, and it just makes for kind of a really interesting look. Finally, I'm just going to do the opposite for our central photos, bringing up the levels palette again, but this time just clicking and dragging that white point slider in just a touch, just to make them a bit more bright. We'll do that for the one just slightly above as well, and that's looking pretty good. So we'll click OK, and once again this contrast treatment just reinforces the idea that it's a collage, that it's made up of separate images. That's us done though with all the separate components that are making up our joiner, so now I'm going to merge them all into a single layer. To do this, I'm first going to make the background layer invisible though, just by clicking off the eye icon that's next to it in the layers palette. And then to merge all of our separate photos into one, I'm going to come up to Layer and down to Merge Visible. And there you can see they collapse into Layer 2, and then we can turn our background layer back on just by clicking where that eye once was. You'll also see now, because we're on a single layer, that our bounding box is just going around all of those once separate photos, and this means that we can click and drag them around as one. We can also, of course, just click and drag out those corner handles just to resize it, make it a bit more prominent within the rest of the frame. That looks pretty good. Click the tick, and once we're done with that, we can see about adding our color treatment that's going to give it even more of an arty look. So what I'm first going to do is just make a copy of layer 2, and I can do this in one of several ways. I can either click and drag it into the new layer icon there in the layers palette, or I can come up to Layer, down to New, and pick Layer via Copy. And the keyboard shortcut for that is Ctrl and J. Once I click that, you'll see we get Layer 2 Copy in the Layers palette. And then I'm going to press Ctrl and I on the keyboard to invert all the colours in our copied layer. Now, I'm not quite sure I like this kind of completely negative looking image though, so up here at the top of the Layers palette, I'm going to click on where it says Normal and come down to where it says Hue. Give that option a click, and we get a bit more of a normal looking image. Not completely normal, of course, it's still pretty kind of pretty alien looking. So to reintroduce some of the original colours, what I'm going to do is add a hue saturation adjustment layer. So just click on the create adjustment layer icon there in the layers palette, pick hue saturation from the list, and then I'm going to click and drag the hue slider all the way over to about 160. And by doing that, you can see we get this really interesting kind of colour infrared look. Of course, it's completely up to you where you leave this hue slider. You can position it pretty much anywhere you like, really. You can cook up some pretty fantastic looking treatments with purple skies and red skies, even green skies if you're that way inclined. But as I said, I'm just going to position this one up at around plus 160. That's just giving us a kind of a sort of slightly hyper-real look. Nothing too outlandish, but something that's definitely going to kind of separate this picture from the norm. I'm also just going to click and drag the saturation slider down to about -30, just to take the edge off some of those colours a little bit. They were probably a little bit too vivid. And then, once I've done all that, just click OK to exit the palette. And just like that, the image is really starting to come together. We've obviously kind of positioned all of our separate photos in there. We've blurred them, we've altered the contrast, and now we've added this really interesting colour effect that's taken it from a regular kind of daylight view to this slightly wacky kind of colour infrared look. I'm pretty pleased with that, but one thing I think it probably could do with is a little bit of extra contrast. To get this, I'm first going to flatten the image, so come up to Layer and down to Flatten Image there at the bottom of the menu. That'll crunch all the layers into a single background layer. And then I'm going to use the Color Curves command to add that little bit of extra contrast that I'm after. These are a bit hidden away in elements, so to find them, just come up to Enhance, down to Adjust Color, and pick Adjust Color Curves. In the full version of Photoshop, you'll find them under the Image menu via Adjustments. So we'll just give that a click, and then we get our Color Curves palette up on screen, where we get a before and after version. And because we can't click on the curve to drag it around in elements, we need to use these sliders on the left-hand side. So to increase that contrast, I'm going to click and drag the Adjust Highlight slider over to the right. There you can see it taking effect on our preview image. All of those highlights getting lighter. And then I'm also going to click and drag the Adjust Shadows slider down to the left, just introducing some extra contrast over the whole picture. And I might just bring up the brightness in the midtones a touch too, so we'll click and drag that one to the right as well. Okay, so I think that's looking pretty good. It certainly looks a lot better than our before version, a lot more punchy and vibrant. So let's click OK to exit the palette. And that's our fine art photo joiner image completed. I'm sure you'll agree, it's a pretty striking result, but the best thing is it's really easy to do, easy to shoot, and easy to manipulate in Photoshop or Elements. So make sure you have a go at it yourself. It works with a variety of subjects. You can even try it with portraits if you're feeling really creative. Make sure you give it a go and send your best efforts into us at Digital Photo. Okay, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.